This is the When Work Isn't Work podcast. This podcast exists to help people reignite the love of what they do in a post-pandemic world. The pandemic gave us a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to reflect on what is truly important to us in work and in life. I'm your host, Sinead Connolly, co-founder and director of Lotus People, an award-winning Sydney-based recruitment agency. We hope you enjoy today's chat. Okay, so I am joined today by Danielle from Pioneera. Danielle, I'm so looking forward to this chat. Danielle had built a super successful corporate career before she had the very scary experience of facing burnout. And at that point, she decided to enter into the world of technology, founding her startup Pioneera, which has been described as the Grammarly for burnout. She's now working with tons of amazing businesses, including Lotus People as well. We are a super big fan of the product. And Danielle is navigating the startup world, pursuing a passion of hers, and all the while ensuring her own balance is maintained. So this is a topic that's really close to my heart, and I hope you enjoy today's podcast. Danielle, welcome.
Hello.
You have
Thank
arrived.
You for having me. Yes, I've arrived. I'm just going to put my second earpod in so I can hear you properly. But hi, thanks for having me, Sinead. Very happy to be here.
Well, my absolute pleasure. Thank you so much for joining us. It's between everything that's going on, June in Sydney, it's winter. We were just talking about the fact there's colds and flus, there's low energy, there's a lot going on, which sort of leads us to a very timely conversation. So I'm really excited about delving into everything. To kick us off, Danielle, would you mind giving us a bit of an overview of your role, your career, your business, where it sits today in its current state?
Absolutely. Yeah. So today I am the founder and CEO of Pioneera. And as you beautifully described, we consider ourselves the Grammarly for mental health. We've built a bot called Indie that connects to chat and email to help people see when they need a little bit of help before they escalate to burnout. And we deliver those science-backed nudges in real time. So that's what I do today. On top of being a mum and a partner and a sister and a daughter and all of the others that from a work perspective, that's what I do.
Amazing. All of the different identities that we hold as individuals, right? It's never just the one. And I think that's the biggest thing that's changed since the pandemic is the ability to see inside each other's homes and to have access to each other's families. And that kind of veil has been lifted slightly over the last few years, which I think is really nice. It's enabled us to, it's been an equalizer. Some people are a fan of that phrase, some people aren't. And it's obviously pertaining predominantly to people who work within office and kind of corporate environments, but it definitely has been interesting to see into people's lives that little bit more rather than just the work veil, which we can tend to put on sometimes. So no, it's good. And look, I'm such a fan of the product. I love the story of how you guys got to where you've got to. I love the idea that we can leverage and utilize technology and automation artificial intelligence, I should say, to really try and tap into these really human experiences and using it as prevention within mental health is such a fantastic reason to lean on artificial intelligence and to lean on technology. So it's an amazing product, and I can so see why you guys have been so successful in your early stages. Can you fill us in? No one gets to where they are today without there being the journey and the path. Can you talk us through how you did get to this stage? Because I know there are kind of weaves and turns that have had to be taken to get you to this point.
Yeah. You know, the interesting thing is if you had asked me 5 years ago what I would be doing, there's no way in a million years I ever would have said this. It wasn't even on the radar. So my background is large corporate. So I feel like I grew up in big companies. I started out running, actually started in communications, so corporate communications. My first degree was in psychology. Then I did a master's of comms. I was in PR, corporate affairs for quite a while. And then I moved across because I wanted to start running businesses. I wanted to be where the decisions were made. So I moved across and started running retail networks and call centers, and then ended up leading large scale transformations. Kind of fell into it. I didn't, it wasn't my intended, but I loved the idea of being able to improve organizations, to create better outcomes for customers, for people. I'm very customer and sort of people, like as in employee, people driven. And so I did that for many years and absolutely loved it. And I worked in insurance, and I felt very passionately about insurance providing a service to the community and providing an important piece of infrastructure to our community. So I loved what I was doing. But went a little bit too hard, unfortunately, as we see very commonly these days. But for me back then, it was 2016. I was delivering a very large transformation, and we delivered it all. So I'm very pleased to say my team delivered ahead of budget, ahead of schedule, did a fantastic job, but it came at a personal cost for me. So I one day went to my boss's office to update him on board paper, and I just was like, I'm done. Like, that's it, I'm done. And he was surprised, and I was more surprised because it wasn't what I expected to come out of my mouth. But I realized at that point that I felt like it was my only option. I was just at that point. And so I stepped out. I was a single mum at the time. I stepped out. I had some fantastic time with my kids. I walked them to school. I came back to my lounge room and looked around on Monday morning at 9 o'clock and said to my mum, rang my mum, what do women do that don't work? I don't know what to do. First time in my life.
Crack a wine. Breakfast wine. That's what they do.
Exactly. But it was in height. So I had that time, and all of the blinkers came off. I could see a whole lot of things that I couldn't see previously. And one of those was that I was burnt out, and all of the symptoms that I was displaying was classic burnout. The doctors kept telling me, of course, no, I'm fine, I can cope, what's wrong? So anyway, that's kind of what I got to. And I started to think about, how did this happen? How did it happen to me, but it didn't happen to other people that I knew? And was there a way that I could deal with it? And I remembered that I would see emails from people that had language, words and phrases that I would respond to. So I'd see things like, here we go again, I don't want to do this anymore. And I would pick up the phone and say, hey, Sinead, let's have a chat. And in 5 or 10 minutes, it would give you the space to sort out whatever was going on. And my team went on and was successful, and they didn't burn out. So I started to think about, well, if I could do this, couldn't we just automate this? Because Microsoft has a spell checker. Surely it can't be that hard to create a spell checker for stress. And at the same time, I was being offered lots of jobs. I was being offered really great jobs in transformation and operations and leadership, where my 20-year career had been. But I just couldn't, it just didn't feel right. Like none of that was what I wanted to do. All of a sudden, all I could think about was this problem that I thought I could solve. And so I went in that direction. I met someone, and then, the universe then starts to go, here you go, here's a step. I met someone that was running an accelerator program for non-technical female founders called She Starts, which was perfectly me. And I talked to them about the concept, and they said, this is a startup. And I said, what's the startup? And so we started, it started down that process, and I joined the accelerator, and we started building a company. And that's now 4 years later, how I ended up leading a startup.
Amazing. I love that so much. And I just, as you're speaking about that, it's so, it pertains so much to a type A personality, that your experience of burnout would be, how do I now create an amazing startup that's going to solve this problem? That it's so inspiring, because so many people do go through that. And yet not many would end up in a situation where they kind of are like, right, how do I fix this? How do I cure this? So it's incredible. I love it as a story. And I think even when we first met and you were speaking through the business and the product and what it was, like your own experience in that situation and having kind of got to that point, it obviously resonates. And I have experienced burnout. I know many of my team have had kind of close experiences to it. I know many people I know and my peers, like we all kind of in this world of work and the amount that's required from us, and the kind of amount that we're expected to fit into a day, and the amount of different technology platforms that we're meant to keep on top of, our Slacks, our Teams, our emails, our LinkedIn messages. Like there's just a lot, and it's technology is so supporting us in being able to do our jobs more effectively. But there's also a huge amount of extra cognitive load, I think, that comes with maintaining all of the different platforms, and there's overwhelm that comes with that as well. So I do think it is becoming more and more prevalent. So it's definitely a product that there is a need for. With regards to your experience with burnout, what were the symptoms? Like, how did you get to the point where you kind of went, you know what this is, other than resigning without intending to.
Yeah. Which I wouldn't recommend, by the way, but yes.
Yeah.
It's quite fascinating because for me, as a single mum with, you know, a pretty big job, I was always tired, and I just come to accept the fact that I would always be tired. So that was kind of ever present. And I think that the challenge is that sometimes that level of exhaustion and burnout just feels like normal everyday tiredness. But what had happened over time, which I didn't realize again till the end, was that tiredness never resolved itself. Like I never recovered. I was constantly exhausted. I got to the point where it was hard to get out of bed in the morning. I wasn't sleeping at night, so I would stay up very late working, and then just to try and, you know, keep on top of everything, then I wouldn't sleep. So it just became a cycle. I'd withdrawn from everything in my life other than my kids and my work. So I went to work, I came home and looked after my kids. I did stuff with my kids, but that was pretty much the extent of it. And so my relationships were starting to suffer. So I wasn't seeing my friends. I wasn't connecting with my family. Those sorts of things that started to happen. The physical kind of things were going on. You know, you're not eating the right food and you're not exercising, you're not sleeping. So physically things were starting to happen. So I hurt my back, I hurt my knee. I felt sick, like nauseous, sick all the time. Like, you know, those sorts of things. Again, I would just put all of that down to being tired and busy. I think the main thing that started me realizing that perhaps this wasn't normal was towards the end, before I just, you know, fronted up and said no more, I'd started to really lose tolerance and patience for the things that I would have normally been patient about. So I'd come out of a meeting and be the same, you know, as you know, everyone knows, it takes time to engage people to change things in organizations. And I would go through that process and largely have done pretty well. But I found I would come out of that meeting and go, oh, I'm so sick of doing this. Like, I'm so sick of saying this. I'm so sick of having, you know, and the energy to go back and do it again was really not there. And that was the time that I started to go, oh, hang on, this is unusual for me. So I noticed that, it was building. And so that was probably the main thing I noticed in myself, just my ability to recover emotionally and mentally from some of those tough conversations was really gone. I think I discounted the physical stuff because the physical stuff is something that you think you can fix really easily. And then when I left, when I left my role and I had time out, the physical stuff got worse. It's almost like as soon as my body had a break, it was like, oh, great, let's just experience everything. But at that point, as I said, for me, it was the main one is that I found it difficult to bounce back from some of those conversations. So my resilience is obviously
resilience, and that's it. It's the resilience, and it's funny because you speak about the different aspects of what it is to be human: the emotional resilience, the physical resilience. There are obviously the different aspects, and I think whether it's the medical system or how we view ourselves and our own health, we kind of do tend to go quite linear or separate with how we diagnose things. And I think when it comes to burnout and your nervous system and stress, we know that when we're stressed, we're releasing cortisol. We know that when we're in a hurry and we're rushing, we're running off adrenaline. And when our bodies and our nervous systems and our brains tip into this space where they are constantly running on stress hormones and they're in a place where your nervous system is heightened and you're not engaging your parasympathetic nervous system enough, you're essentially in a point where you are overrunning your body. And so it does impact everything. It impacts your emotional responses, it impacts your physical health, it impacts your sleep because your brain finds it harder to actually switch into that rest and restore mode. So there's many different kind of signals and signifiers, and it can manifest very differently in different people. I know for me, I would liken my burnout, and my burnout by doctors was called chronic fatigue syndrome. And similar to you, it was like my amygdala, that part of my brain was just constantly in overdrive and constantly in fight or flight. And I really struggled. And it actually took me a couple of months to pull my brain back out of constant fight or flight mode. And once it switches into that mode, it's like the old analogy of being chased through a jungle by a tiger. Your brain is literally seeing fear everywhere. It's seeing danger everywhere. And so to have that experience and for your brain to try and pull back from that to a state where it's totally relaxed, it can be really hard. So it ends up in this sort of cycle and experience where you're not rested, sleep isn't making you feel rested, you're reaching exhaustion, and it's really going to take a lot to get you out of there. And I think that's where, and I think there's many different names, whether it's chronic fatigue or adrenal fatigue or burnout or acute stress or workplace stress. It's obviously got many different hats, but unfortunately, when it reaches that extreme level that I think you and I have experienced, unfortunately, it's something that is very severe. But fortunately, there is a flip side to that. And I know personally, when I had that experience, and this is 1 year into running Lotus People, we were so successful really quickly. Everyone wanted to work with us. We were bringing so much fresh energy to the industry, and it was such a success story. But then in the background, I'm going, I have no energy. I have depleted. I'm doing kind of 15-hour days, eating dinner at my desk. It's amazing that this startup is successful. However, I am absolutely shattered and running myself into the ground. But I know since then, as soon as I got well through everything, all of the holistic means, for me, it was meditation and exercise and naturopaths and like all of the different kind of ways that you can get better from something like this. And personally, it was the best thing that's ever happened to me, because I will never let my body get there again. I have such a heightened sense of my own health and my own sort of key indicators in my body of like, right, what's happening where, what's happening now, how do I manage this? Have you found something similar? Do you manage your own balance and your own mental health in a different way since that experience?
Yeah, look, absolutely. So the doctor, diagnosed me with adrenal fatigue, so similar to you. And, she's doing some blood tests and stuff. And she's like, oh my God, I've never seen hormone levels. So who knew that would affect your hormones? Like it was all strong. So I learned a lot, and I'm much more aware of my triggers now and my cues. So the first thing is that I know that when my eyes start to get hot and grainy, like they're standing them, that's a walk away, like literally walk away from your death sign. But that's usually when it's gone to the extreme. So I've put some practices in place. So I will only, for example, if I have to work, I'll only work late 2 nights a week. I will not do any more than that, regardless of what's going on. This is, you can see around me, is our home office. So I literally can shut the door and walk out, and I'm at home, and I'm very good at shutting the door and walking out now. And so that there are a couple of practices I've put into place. So, that's something that I do. But I think the main thing that has been really interesting for me is just to rebalance, or just to actually change in some respects, what I considered my measures of success. So a bit like you're running really hard, so I was doing well, very well. My team was doing extremely well. We were delivering things that most people couldn't deliver, which is why I kept getting job offers, because they're like, what you do is really hard and most people can't do it. I'm like, really? I didn't know that. I just thought everyone could do this. So I had to start to really rethink, well, what is a measure of success? Is a measure of success achieving that job, or that, sign off from the board, or that money, whatever it was? Or is a measure of success actually being able to get out of bed in the morning, being able to hold my son's hand when he crosses the road, have him come up and hug me for no reason, for the kids not to say to me, Mum, put your phone away, because I was constantly on my phone, Mum, put your phone away. So I had to really think about that, like what was important to me. And that was actually, I think, probably the most interesting process for me, because I then just, over the period of the last couple of years, my priorities have completely shifted. So I'm super passionate about what we do, because I want to prevent the situation from happening to others. But my priorities are also my children, my family, my health. I will say to people now, I'm sorry, I can't do that till tomorrow. I never done that ever in the past, So that for me has been the most interesting journey, going from the person that thought I needed to please everyone to realizing actually, if I'm not pleasing myself, then there's nothing left for anyone. And that was, I experienced that in the most extreme way. What has been interesting now is, you and I experienced this before COVID. So for me, it was 2000, like it happened in 2016. It was probably coming for years before that. And it was really foreign. No one really got it. No one really understood it.
Yeah.
So now after COVID, we're seeing huge instances, which is terrible. I'm not celebrating that in any way, shape or form. But what it does provide is relevance and context for people now. They understand it. So these conversations, I think most people can relate to now because they're experiencing some element of it, unfortunately. But it does mean that people can take action sooner than you or I could. So perhaps they can learn from our journey.
Completely. And you're right. I think when it did happen, I had personally, I think it was 2015. I was around the same time that I experienced that. And I had a lot of shame around it because it wasn't spoken about, and it definitely wasn't as part of the day-to-day rhetoric as it is now. I read a Black Dog Institute report on mental health through the pandemic recently, and they said that the silver lining of the whole pandemic is just the increased awareness, particularly in business, around mental health, and how the conversation around mental health has kind of, because unfortunately of the horrific experience we all had with all of the lockdowns and with working from home, and obviously women being kind of copping the brunt of that in terms of the caring responsibilities and the kind of working responsibilities. And I think that that is true. It has shifted massively and dramatically, and it's something naturally from my own experience I've always been extremely passionate about. And similar to you, I haven't wanted anyone particularly in my team who I can very much support and guide, and I don't want them to experience what I experienced. But now having that conversation, whether it's with shareholders, whether it's with other team members or the leadership team, it's just part of the day-to-day sort of conversation, which I think, again, it's good that it's been brought into the sphere of awareness. But at the same time, agreeing with you, it's not ideal that it is more common these days. And I think we've had such a tricky few years, particularly in Australia, with the borders being closed for so long and people being separated from families, and the workloads continuing as they are, and kind of everyone at the moment, there's such a talent shortage over here in comparison to other countries, and so everyone is overloaded, everyone is overworked, there's capacity issues, so it's in a tricky, weird sort of stress soup at the moment in Australia within the working world. And it's part of what has prompted us to start this conversation and to start this podcast. Is the conversations we're having with people are completely changed. People want to work for values-based businesses. They want to look at remote and flexible working. They want to really, I think it's encouraged people to want to think about what is important to them in a post-COVID world. And I know we're not post, I don't know if post is the right correct term. Who knows where we're at with it, but it is definitely different. From your perspective, you're obviously having these conversations with execs and with organizations daily. What has changed over the last couple of years in terms of those conversations and how they're happening?
I think COVID, yes, definitely put mental health and people's well-being on the agenda. So that timing-wise has definitely happened. But I think the thing that's had the most impact actually is the Great Resignation, which you kind of referred to, and I know has been huge for you guys in terms of business-wise, but also load on your team. I think the reality of business is when we feel the impact to the business is when we take action. And I think the reason why mental health is being looked at now is because it's having an impact on business. People either are not delivering, or their sick leave is going up, or they're leaving. And we're seeing data from companies like PwC that are saying people will move to another company that has better mental health support. So for 22% of candidates in the market, mental health support is their number one criteria when they're deciding about a new job. So I think that context means that businesses are starting to look at it because they're feeling the impact and they can't get talent. So that's kind of what I think has started to shape the conversation. So when we're talking to customers and we're talking to businesses about our product, that's what we're hearing. We're hearing, I don't know how to manage hybrid work. So they're like, well, what do? Are people at home? What allowed to build team culture in the past was everyone together, and we can't do that now anymore. So then business demands people coming back 3 days or 2 days, but then people don't want to do that. So there's this whole complexity around hybrid work that we've never dealt with before. And then we've got the Great Resignation on top of that, which not only has meant it's hard to find talent, but it's very expensive. So we've gone through a process of, hiring new people, as I was saying to you, and we found some fantastic people, absolutely brilliant people. But it's hard to find those people, and the people that came to join us were very purpose driven. They loved what we were doing. They wanted to be part of improving and changing workplaces. So we're seeing that kind of play out. And I think there'll be a tail end effect of mental health. So I think we're starting to see the effects, and that's coming through in terms of the Great Resignation and what particularly millennials are demanding from their workplace, but their employers. But I think we're just starting to experience that, because we know from mental health, we know from our own kind of burnout situation, that time, the effect to be 6 months, 12 months, is we're really, I think, going to start to see the impact of that. So that's kind of what we're observing at the moment.
Yeah, and you're exactly right. It's never a situation of, oh, I've had a stressful day, I'm now burnt out. There is that lead up, and I think having that software in place to be able to track that exactly and kind of catch those things and be preventative with it is important. With the conversations you're having, you mentioned, oh, sorry.
No, please go ahead.
I was just going to say, I think there's an ever so slight lag, so we might catch over each other slightly. But with you mentioned that 22% of people, mental health, for people looking for work, mental health is their biggest consideration. And that doesn't surprise me in the slightest. I hadn't heard that stat, but anecdotally, based on what we're seeing and the fact that people are being so purpose driven and purpose led in what they're looking for in terms of new roles and businesses, it doesn't surprise me in the slightest. I have a team of 20, and all day long we're speaking to candidates who are reassessing what they're looking for and what's important to them, and being within a purpose-led business and a business that values its people and has a strong people strategy is absolutely the number one thing, along with flexibility, which I think all ties in. But with the businesses that are looking at mental health and burnout and adding it to an agenda, do you think it's particularly for certain generations or people who are kind of maybe less forward thinking, do you think it's a tick box exercise because, okay, this is what's important to people, we need to do it? And even if it is, does that matter as long as it's being done? I suppose it needs, in my mind, it probably needs to be genuine.
I think it's a bit of both, to be honest. So I think yes, there are companies that are just doing it for a tick box, and then lots of companies have always just there have always been companies that have just done it for the tick box. They've only just had the engagement survey once a year, or they've got an EAP program because they have to by legislation. So there's always been some of those companies. What we're seeing though is more companies that genuinely are trying to make it a part of their workplace. So there's a larger group. But then again, particularly in a large organization, there's a big cohort of people you have to bring across. You've got to bring all your managers and all your, that's quite a significant change process. But we are seeing more evidence of organizations that are wanting to do that. Where we're seeing the most impact actually is two areas. So one is where you have young managers. So you kind of referred to so the 22% that I referred to is the Future of Work report that PwC has done, and they've talked about particularly the number of younger sort of millennial managers and people moving around in roles. So we're seeing organisations that have younger managers or people that are new to leadership needing a little bit more extra support. So that's one thing. But the second thing that we're also seeing is that there seems to be sort of a genuine desire in people-based or service-based businesses. So businesses such as yours, like recruitment, digital marketing, where they have people, like their business is their people, if that makes sense. So I call them service-based industries, but they're not all just service. So the same goes for technology businesses, because their developers and engineers are so critical to creating technology. And I know that because so are ours. They're the businesses that seem to be very, very interested in doing something different, particularly the ones that have grown significantly through COVID. So a number of our clients have grown significantly through COVID. One of our clients has like literally put on 50 or 60 people in the last 12 months, and they've now just rolled out into their whole company. And we know that when you scale beyond kind of, 15, 20 people, that there's a risk that you lose the essence of the culture that is successful. Then it's much harder to manage. The leaders can't get their arms around their people anymore because they have so many people So that is where we're seeing a lot of interest, and these companies want to continue to be successful. So they're actively looking for newer solutions. And so they're the ones we love to work with because they're innovative and they genuinely care about their people. We are talking to a lot of very big corporates that are saying to us, actually, we really want to look at things differently. And that's across the organization. So it's people leaders, it could be technology teams. There's a number of different areas that we're talking to. So I do think the tide is starting to turn. What will be important is that we maintain this. So we don't just forget in a year's time that people do need mental health support and people do want to work flexibly. We don't just bounce back to our pre-COVID ways. So I think that's the thing that we need to maintain over the next kind of 6 to 12 months, that we understand that the future of work is actually happening right now.
Yeah, and I love that. And I think there could be a risk that on a corporate agenda, when you get back for businesses, when you get back to a certain level of productivity and normality after the couple of years we've had, it could start to fall down the list because it's BAU, things just keep on going. But I actually think that the drivers and the behaviors and the demands of candidates will make it so that it will have to stay as a priority, because I don't think or see candidates really coming back from this and going, oh well, that was a funny few years, and falling back into old habits. I think it will be a new expectation.
Yeah, look, I agree with you. And I think we've seen the same with climate. If you think about the younger generations, so younger than me, my children's generation, they were the ones, driving this whole climate agenda. And we've seen what's happened now in the election in Australia, and, the rise of the Teal candidates, all about climate and equality, and, transparency in government. So we've seen that shift starting to happen at a government perspective. And I think we'll see the same in businesses, to exactly your point, because candidates will demand it and businesses will need to respond to remain competitive. We're also seeing that socially, there seems to be a trend towards people coming out of corporates and into smaller businesses, startups, starting their own. I was just reading something this morning in the AFR about, the number of very successful young corporate executives that are coming out of management consultants and other organizations and starting very successful businesses. So, startups and small business are the backbone of the Australian economy. They're sort of 40 to 50% of the Australian economy. And people are finding that a more attractive option to work in. It provides flexibility. It provides innovation. It provides a very, very fast opportunity to develop. Like, you develop exponentially in a startup and in a small business.
You do.
So I think that will also then cause the larger organizations to say, okay, well, if we want this talent, then we're going to need to think differently. So yeah, I agree with you. I think that will drive it in the next couple of years.
Yeah, and I've totally seen that over the years. I've been in recruitment now for 10 years in Australia, and I've seen that the tech companies have led the charge. The knowledge-based industries, like you were speaking about earlier, are the ones who the focus has to be on the people, because as you said, they have no success within their organization without the individuals and their knowledge and the work that they do day to day. So it is something that I think the tech companies have always led the charge on. If you think back kind of 5 to 10 years ago, the Googles, the Facebooks, they were all the big names that I remember everyone talking about. Google, they had free food on site and they had a gym on site, and it was all of these kind of really fun things that aren't relevant so much to people anymore. It's not what they look for now. However, I agree with you. I think those types of businesses will become so appealing to individuals for all of the reasons we've spoken about: values, for purpose, that other businesses, and I have seen that, they do start to adapt. And businesses that have never even considered their employee branding or their employee value proposition this year have been asking for us for consultation and additional resources, and what can we do. And we've been speaking with businesses about how they can be competitive in this candidate short market. And so I think whether you lead with that, and that's one of your key priorities because it comes from a genuine place, or it's just that now it has to be, I think you're right, it will get to that stage where most other businesses will need to adapt or die, right?
Well, I think, look, I think so. I think the difference will be those that are just doing it because they're saying that, like ticking a box. It will become clear pretty quickly, because you go into an organization and they say all the right things. And I've had this as an employer years ago. This organization sold me beautiful job, beautiful thing. And I went in there on day one. I was like, oh God, this is not what they said. So I knew that was not good from the moment I started, and I left sort of 6 months later. So people will figure out pretty quickly if the organization's actions aren't supporting the word. And then they'll move on quite quickly. So I think organizations that are just ticking the box need to be very aware that if you're not walking the talk, people will see that. And now they're willing to move. Like previously, they would stick it out. Like, as I said, I stuck it out 6 months waiting for it to change, hoping. And now people are moving literally within, a couple of months, because they can find a better option. And what we're trying to do with our product is help people see that before it gets to the kind of drop dead date. I don't want good employers, or just employers in general, to be in the position where people are just leaving unexpectedly because their stress levels and their burnout levels are so high and no one's seen it and been able to do anything about it. We want to give the organisation the ability to say, how can I help you? Whether they choose to do that or not is on them, but at least they've got the data to say, well, actually, we're seeing it's chronic stress all the time and there's no respite. How do we say to the team, can we give you some respite? So we're putting the tools in the hands of the employers and the employees. Whether they use them, of course, that's up to them, but we're giving the employees an opportunity to actually walk the talk.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's a great tool for businesses to have. Everyone these days is making decisions based on data and based on actual facts and information in front of them, rather than on a hunch. And I think this is something that hasn't been able to be easily tracked until now. So it's extremely useful. If someone is in a business at the moment and they're listening to this and feeling stressed and burnt out and feeling like all of this is resonating, they're going, oh my goodness, this could be me. Would you first recommend that they speak to their leaders, or if based on knowing that startups are flexible and there's lots of other roles out there and maybe they're just not aligned with the values, that they should look somewhere else? Do you have a kind of a thought on which direction to go in?
Yeah, look, I think if you're feeling like this, then it's probably worth just taking a tiny little step back mentally and just starting to think about when and how you feel like this, because it could be a work thing, but there could be some other things happening in your life that's contributing before you kind of rush off and leave your job. So try and understand. And what I did is, I mentioned that I felt those meetings, I just wasn't bouncing back from those conversations. So I started to take note of that and go, okay, I feel like this again. Okay, so it's this conversation at this time. And I started to, I guess, identify exactly now what Indy's doing. Maybe that's why I built that into the bot, because that's what I was doing. And so I picked up the pattern, and that then, I guess, ultimately was one of the reasons why I subconsciously made the decision that I did. So I would just take a little bit of time, not long, like just take a couple of weeks to just try and understand what is it that's creating that feeling for you. And then you can think about action points. The first thing I would do is just to be really kind and gentle with yourself and stop telling yourself that you're a loser and you can't cope and that you're stuck. You always have choices. I think it's really important to remember you have choices. There are very small things you can do. Go to bed half an hour early, walk for 10 minutes a day. Like, there's simple micro habits, I think they call it, that you can do that's not overwhelming. So just pick one thing that you love to do and try and get that every day. Listen to a podcast. I love to read, so I try and make sure I've got a really strong mental, go and sit down for 5 or 10 minutes and I'll just read, and it just gets head into a different space. So that's what I would definitely recommend. If from that you realize, yes, my workplace isn't the right place for me, then some places are safe enough for you to speak up, where you could sit down with your boss and say, this is how I'm feeling. Could we look at lessening my workload? Could I work more flexibly? Could I go part-time? Like, there will be some options in workplaces if you feel comfortable and safe to have that conversation. Unfortunately, not everyone feels like that. So if you don't feel comfortable and safe. Sometimes your boss can surprise you. You can, or one of your colleagues may, say to you whether or not you think you could ask the question. But if you don't feel safe in that workplace and you can't see that things are going to shift, then perhaps it's worth looking further afield at options. But I would never sort of up and quit or advise anyone to up and quit until they've actually taken the time to go, well, could my workplace support me? Because we're seeing that companies, they do want to support people a lot more than we have in the past.
Yeah, and even as you say that, it makes me think of how we operate at Lotus. We have I would like to think it's a very psychologically safe workplace. We do a lot as a leadership team to prioritize mental health, and we are so aware of burnout. We have conversations about kind of workload, but I also know we're busy. Even this week, as an example, we've had 3 or 4 people off sick. We have 3 people on annual leave. The team we're as busy as ever, and the team is smaller. So I know this week there's been people who are half sick coming back, limping along, and this would be the worst example of us living our best non-burnout lives. We're just all tired and cracking on and getting through it and doing what we can to show up for our candidates and our clients. But sometimes you do, as leaders, as individuals, as businesses, you can flick into just keeping on going mode. And so if anyone actively came to me and said, hey, I'm struggling, I would pause, step back, and absolutely hold space for that and make changes. But also sometimes you are just kind of in that hamster wheel of just keeping on going. So no matter what the situation is and how good you hope to be in terms of stress management and workload management, etc., I still think as an individual there is a responsibility and initiative that comes with saying, hi, hand up, can I have some help? And everyone will stop and say, okay, of course, what can we do to support? And that's obviously speaking internally, but it is, I think, on the individual as well to catch that.
Totally. And I think the responsibility sits with both. So I think, when we're talking to organizations about our product, they're like, well, where does the liability sit? And I said, so we work through the legal kind of situation. But then we have an ethical, I always then say, well, there's the legal thing, but then there's the ethical responsibility. So as an employer, you have a responsibility to provide a duty of care to your people, which means you create an environment that's safe and they can speak up and they can develop and all that sort of stuff. But as an employee, you also have a duty of care to your workplace, which is that you take responsibility for your own development. You take responsibility to speak up when you need to. So I think the responsibility squarely sits with both, which is why our product helps companies and individuals, because we want to kind of support both. But I do think there's a responsibility for the employees. Absolutely. You need to, because at the end of the day, no one can be responsible for us but us. Like, I'm the only person responsible. When I burnt out, it's 100% on me. Like, I allowed that to happen. Would I allow it again? No. Have I gotten close? Yes. So even after everything that I know, I and the reason why our bot is called Indy is because after my burnout and I was doing something else, I started heading down that track again. And she one day said to me, Mum, if you get this, are you going to work like this again? And I was so shocked. I was like, oh, how have I done this after everything I've learned? And so I named the bot after Indy because she called me on something, and that's what I want her to do for the rest of the world. But the responsibility absolutely sits with both. And we're in a similar position to you, Sinead. Like, we've got so much going on. So as the CEO and the leader of the business, what I try to do with the team is make sure we're prioritizing what we need to do now. So I've pushed things out of the product development to say, right, well, we'll do that in July and we'll do that here, just to give the development team a little bit of space, but also for them to see that I care enough. Because again, walking the talk, if I say I care about you, but know everything, you're doing 15-hour days, that's not necessarily walking the talk. I made sure they had their day off for the public day, so we're trying that way.
Yeah. And you're right. I think as leaders, even within Lotus and within my team, everyone, like, how I deal with the busyness. And this week, it's like, right, guys, if you're sick, you're sick. Take the day off, rest. No, you need another day. Take that day. Everything can be managed. Everything can be figured out. everything is figure outable is my catchphrase. I live by that
Yeah.
mantra of just like everything can be worked
Yeah.
out. If you're sick, you're sick, you need to rest. And so I'm definitely a proponent of getting people out the door and getting them well, rather than can we all just get back in and get things done. I don't think that's a constructive or a good way of working. And I think as well, touching on what you said about reading and kind of all that stuff, for me, it's devices. Like I know as soon as my nervous system is in overdrive and my brain is kind of firing at all cylinders and I'm not necessarily in a healthy place with it, it's devices. The more time I spend on my phone, or I start going into like looking for those dopamine hits, my brain starts wanting to open Instagram or open LinkedIn, and I'm tired. So it's mindless, but these little tiny pings of dopamine are keeping my brain moving while it's really, really tired. So reading for me is an absolute godsend as well. Phone on do not disturb, reading, quiet, no screen time, starting to calm down into a normal nervous system state is definitely super helpful for me. But lots of different things that people can do, obviously depending on what suits them. I want to ask you before we do finish up about your experience as a female founder within technology, and it's a huge conversation, so it's definitely not one that we're going to be able to talk about for the next few hours, even though I know we both could. I saw an article in Smart Company. There's been, and from my own experience, there's been record amount of venture capitalist funding coming into startups. But I read an article that only 5% of VC funding in 2020 went to female founded businesses within tech, which just is so scarily low. How has your experience been within that space and within that sector?
I think, look, I guess it's challenging, and women, we face this same issue regardless of where we are. I think probably the main thing that I have my entire career is just kind of not, forgotten that I'm a woman, which is sad, but I've not let the fact that I'm a woman stop me from doing anything that I wanted to do. So it's not conscious. I don't go, this is the stuff. I think as a technology company, it is sort of present. I do feel it sometimes. I think the main thing is to understand, what I have learned throughout the years is that you're ready for different amounts of funding at different stages. And so I think from a VC perspective, so we've had a couple of chats with VCs, but we're probably not going to take, we're not going to go for the big VC funding for a little while because we're not ready for it. So that kind of takes me out of the mix of the funding. I think the VCs, certainly the ones that I've been dealing with and connected to, are putting a lot more effort into making sure that they're making decisions that are free from unconscious bias, those sorts of things. They're actively looking for balanced pipelines. So they're putting into processes in place, actually, that processes that we put into place in corporate kind of 10 years ago, I'm seeing that VCs are putting into place now. So I think that's a good thing. And I think the government's trying to balance it out. And, there's the Boosting Female Founders Grant and stuff like that. But it is present. I'd be if I present. I think a little bit what I into mental health. If you're a woman starting out in business, I wouldn't let it dissuade you. I would go ahead and, go and be fabulous, because the only way really that we change the system is that more women like yourself are successful. And so if we have more women that are successful, that can be the decision maker, then that's how the system starts to change. And that was why kind of, 15, 20 years ago, I moved out of comms into running businesses, because that's where the decisions were being made. Part of me starting Pioneera and making sure that we're bringing in women, and not just women, but lots of people from, traditionally minority groups, is because then we can be a successful business that allows those people to go on and be successful, and you're kind of, then propagating the future. So that's what I would focus on. I think the stats don't look great. I'll acknowledge that, but I wouldn't let it get in your way.
No, and I think that's such a good answer and such a good point. And I know from my own experience in running a business as a female founder or business owner has been the same thing. Like, you just crack on. We might deal with kind of more according to the statistics, imposter syndrome, and we might experience more challenges than our male counterparts, but you have to overcome them and keep on going with it. And I think there is, of course, things that can be done at a government level and an industry level, but at the end of the day, individuals who might want to do it, as you say, just try and not let that hold you back, because it's not a great stat, but it will change, and positive thinking and moving forward will help.
Well, and look, I'm not perfect, so I consistently see articles in the media about the people getting funding, and they're typically a group of men, right? So there's 2 men, there's 3 men, there's 5 men, or there's 4 men and 1 woman. You go, okay. So I consistently see that, and I have moments where I'm like, oh, and I look at the business, the concept, and I'm like, oh, so I have to manage my own sort of expectations and my positive self-talk around that, and that my journey is my journey. So I don't think, we're not immune to it, but to your point, it's how we pick up and keep moving forward that will kind of make the difference. So yeah,
exactly. And women are fantastic at supporting one another as well. So networks of female business owners, or females supporting one another and promoting and networking and sharing, all of that can make a massive difference as well. Before I let you go, is there any one bit of advice that you would share with someone who's listening to this and just in a rut, they're ready for a change, they're not feeling the zest or the love of what they do day to day? What would you recommend?
Yeah, I would recommend just starting to do something differently, and it could be just something really simple. So I cut my finger last weekend. You can't see it. I had a big band-aid, and I'm right-handed. So it meant for the weekend I had to do everything with my left hand. I couldn't write. I couldn't brush my teeth. I couldn't wash up. Terrible. I had to not wash up all weekend. I had to do it all with my left hand. Wash myself in the shower. It was really weird, but it actually was interesting because I was challenging myself, and I'm sure I was building new neural pathways. So even if you just do something really simple, like put your watch on your other hand or use your left hand for the day, sometimes we just need to do something different in order for us to look at the future differently. And this is what Indy tries to do, just to give you a bit of a nudge when you need it, to say, hey, have you considered? So just pick something and do it differently. I'm a real advocate of being active. So get out for a 10-minute walk, stand outside in the sun if you can, whatever it is. But if you start to do just one thing different, it usually then encourages you to start to be able to feel that you can do a little bit more. And also to forgive yourself and to be okay with yourself. Don't judge yourself. Don't tell yourself you're a loser. Don't tell yourself that you can't cope. Just say, okay, this is where I'm at, and what can I do about it? So that would be my advice.
I love that, a bit of self-compassion. If we could all start as people, if we could speak to ourselves the way we speak to our best friends or the people that we love and support, we would all be a whole lot kinder to ourselves.
Exactly. And look out for help. Follow us on LinkedIn. We're always posting tips and stuff like that, or follow us at pioneera.com, where there's lots of, the one thing that's great about lots of information, on the crowd, but lots of information and tips to help you move forward. And I think that advice of talk to yourself like you would your best friend is brilliant. I think that's
it is. I love it. I think I've someone said that to me years ago, and I don't think any of us are good enough at doing that, but it would be a very good start. Danielle, thank you so much. I honestly could chat all day. I've loved this conversation. Thank you so much for joining us today.
You're welcome. Thank you for having me. I feel like we could talk all day, but I hope everyone has a wonderful day and takes care of themselves, because together, if we all do it, then we can move forward together. So sending you all lots of, great happiness, positive vibes, and
positive feelings. Exactly right. Thank you so much.
This podcast is sponsored by Lotus People Recruitment. We are an award-winning Sydney-based recruitment agency with a genuine human-first and innovative approach. Lotus People are disrupting the recruitment industry by placing quality and service at the heart of all we do. Recruiting roles across HR, talent, business support, and much more. Head to our website today for more information if you are a job seeker or an employer hiring staff. We're at lotuspeople.com.au.